Hello, I'm the Dark Master, and welcome back to the Tale of the Trilobites. In today's installment of this video series, we shall be covering the 7th order of the Trilobites, the Odontopleurida. Wow, we're already over halfway done with all of the orders. Anyway, we shall be covering this group's history of study, how they are related to other trilobite orders, as well as their internal relationships and diversity, what their ecology may have been like, how you can identify them in the field via their diagnostic traits, and in the end, what their ultimate fate may have been. Let us start our coverage of these rather spiny boys with their controversial taxonomic history with the Laquita. It's a rather spiny issue that I did touch on in a previous episode where I discussed this superficially similar Laquita. So check out the previous episode if you'd like to learn more from their point of view as well as their side. Plus, it's also a good video, I think, on its own as well. But yeah, let's get on into it.
An experienced employee of the month always keeps a brick of lead in his hat.
Alright, so initially the Odontopleurida were initially discovered around 1959 by Whittington. They were considered part of the Laquita order as the superfamily Odontopleurida. This was based on several shared traits of the Protaspides, aka the larva. This is the position seen in Thomas and Holloway's 1988 paper, as well as the 1997 paper by Richard Fortey, a noted British paleontologist, who made large contribution to the field of study of trilobites. However, over time, differences began to emerge as further research showed several notable differences between the two groups. For example, it was found that larval Laquitids were twice the size of those of odontopleurids, with some studies arguing that the Laquitids are more closely related to the Protida. But this is a very fringe position, and I wouldn't go that far. Another major difference is seen in the development of the glabella, which is part of the head that overlaps the mouth. Please consider checking out my second episode of this video series where I cover a lot of the terminology related to this group. If any word I say happens to confuse you, as honestly it can be a bit confusing to people who don't know the terminology. In Laquita, the lobes arise from the axial furrow, while in Odontopleurida, these ridges emerge in a far more standard method seen in other trilobite groups from the glabella. Other differences include the extent of ventral calcification, which is greater in Laquita than in Odontopleurida, as well as the hypostome size, which is larger in the Laquita. In the end, during the late 1990s/early 2000s, they were finally separated as their own order, alongside the other superfamily formerly included in Laquita, the Damseloidea, which are united with the Odontopleurida by several features of their eye ridges, glabella, and hypostome. Of course, there are still some issues, like, for example, the Laquita family, the Licalocephalidae, which has been in recent years been found to be potentially polyphyletic, with some members being potentially odontopleurids as opposed to actual Laquitids, which makes sense as these two orders, despite what some people may say, do seem to be closely related, though distinct. And indeed, some sources, for some reason, still list both of them as being part of the same order, which is no longer considered correct. And I do personally consider that both of these are probably each other's closest relatives, which, makes sense given their fossil record, but it's still up for debate. Regardless, now let us discuss the diagnostic traits that you can identify these guys in the field now that we've finished their taxonomic history. Alright, so the odontopleurids are often referred to as the spiny trilobites, much like the Laquitids, and while yes, indeed, I would say that this order has the most spiny trilobites of all time, this trait alone is not sufficient to identify a trilobite as being members of this order, as there are numerous Laquitids, protids, phacopids, and red lichenids that were spiny in their own right and could be theoretically confused for these guys. Really, there are more subtle traits one must look for in order to properly identify these guys. First, starting with the cephalon, or head, they have opisthopereon sutures, simple holocaurial eyes that are usually not very large. They have a small counterminute hypostome, or mouth, a glabella that extends to the anterior border, lobation that is complex, especially in later forms from the Silurian and Devonian, and they are usually very spiny, as well as lacking Terence ridges. Moving down to the thorax, it's highly variable, usually around 8 to 13 segments, and are oftentimes very spiny. Last and not least, we got the pygidium, or tail, which is usually a micropygus, aka very much smaller than the head, or sub-isopygus, which is near to the size of the head but just a little smaller, and possess large distinctive pairs of spines. Now, as always, what I have said here is rather generalized, and there are usually exceptions to every rule when it comes to trilobites. And I suggest that if you do happen to find a trilobite fossil, mark its location, put in GPS and stuff, and contact your local museum, as they can help you identify, local area trilobites a lot more than I possibly could, as, I'm just a guy on YouTube. Now that we've covered their diagnostic traits, let us go over the diversity to be found within the Odontopleurida and see how wonderful it is. Alright, so the Odontopleurida are divided into two superfamilies, the Damselloidea and the Odontopleuroidea. Shockingly, despite these being superfamilies, despite what you may expect, both consist of only a single family, meaning that, they're one of the smaller groups of trilobites, being around the size of the Lichida. So, let us start with the older of these two groups, the Damselloidea. These generally had a more primitive body form with less complex lobation on the cephalon, aka head. The thorax, aka body, generally had up to 13 segments, with less specialized spine shapes, as well as just less obvious spines overall. The pygidium or tail of these guys are usually longer, with more axial segments, a tapering axis, and thicker sets of marginal spines, as up to 4 pairs of pleural spines, which can be of several lengths. There are around 35 genera. Several notable ones include Black Welderia, Neodraponura, which had these swallow-like feathery growths on their tail. There was Paradamsella, Palaeodotes, the stalk-eyed Parabrachwalderi, Turnistion, and the most famous genus, Damsella, which gave the superfamily its name. Sadly, this beautiful group didn't really last all that long, emerging in the Middle Cambrian alongside the first Lichida and going extinct at some point in the Upper Cambrian, but not before giving rise to the second and far more iconic superfamily, the Odontopleuroidea. These are distinguished from the others by having a generally shorter thorax with 8 to 10 segments, likely to better enroll, and are often covered with 2 to 3 pairs of big spines on each of these segments, as well as countless smaller spines and tubercles. Their cephalon, aka head, often had prominent eye ridges and a distinctive notch in the margins of the free cheek regions, though some genera did secondarily lose these traits. The pygidium or tail is generally micropygius, aka a lot smaller than the head, with the longest spines proportionally of any trilobite to be seen in this group. In terms of numbers, this was the larger of the two superfamilies, with a total of around 50 genera or so. So many are notable, including Selenopeltis, the stalked-eye Miraspis, which is perhaps the spiniest trilobite to ever exist, the bunny-eared Dicranius, and other spiny monstrosities like Keternoaspis, Chucloestina, and the genus Odontopleurida, which gave the superfamily and by extension the order its name. Now that we've done a good coverage of the diversity to be found within the Odontopleurida order, let us now discuss the potential ecology that these guys may have had during their long existence. And if you're interested, I highly recommend checking out some of these guys. If you have like a local mineral show, oftentimes you'll see these guys or replicas of them being sold. And honestly, they're pretty cool to look at, even if you can't afford them. Alright, so much like the related Laquita, there haven't been a whole lot of ecological studies on the Odontopleurida specifically, so what I will say is a bit more speculative compared to some other Trilobite orders I've discussed. The first and most perhaps obvious trait that these guys had that feeds into their ecology are their spines. Some even had spines on their spines, and some even had spines on their spines on their spines, but that's a bit excessive. Which would have, when rolled up, served as formidable defense against the likes of jawed fish and eurypterids. I mean, seriously, do you want to step on something like that? Do you want to end up like Squidward? No, I don't think you do. And plus, we also see a trend of this increasing spiniosity as time goes forward, which does indicate a large level of selective pressure to increase this armor against potential predators. All these spines would have also helped to break up the outline of individuals in certain reef habitats, akin to a lot of modern day reef crustaceans, especially if we assume that they had a lot of cryptic coloring, which no doubt many of them did. Plus, it would have also provided a surface for algae to grow on them as further camouflage, kinda akin to decorated crabs, though less intentional. These spiny boys may have also helped, them from sinking into the mud. At least two genera had stalked eyes. In other trilobite groups, this is believed to have been used to allow them to serve as ambush predators, being buried in the sediment. But for the Odontopleurida, the presence of such elaborate spines honestly makes this unlikely, as they probably couldn't easily dig through the sediment compared to the much more smooth esophids who are similar. So, in likelihood, these stalked-eye trilobites were probably exploring a different niche, perhaps one that we don't have a close analog to on Earth today. Given that a lot of spiny animals often supplement their physical defense with bright colors and toxins, it's also possible that some odontopleurids may have also done this as well, though that's highly speculative. Now that we've covered the ecology of this group for a bit, let us discuss their evolutionary history and what in the end happened to these guys. Alright, so the Odontopleurida emerged during the Middle Cambrian alongside the first Laquita, with the oldest members of these guys likely dating back towards the end of the early Cambrian. And they served as sort of a second wave of trilobite diversity once the red Laquitids were petering out. During this time, however, they were not a common part of the trilobite fauna, which was instead dominated by the Pedicopaurida, Asaphida, Corynexochida, and Agnostida. While the Damselodias did die out in the Upper Cambrian, the other superfamily, more than made up for them and went through the rest of the Ordovician and Cambrian extinction rather well. And while they did increase in diversity throughout the Ordovician, they still weren't really a major part, with the Esophids becoming the dominant group of trilobites during this time, alongside the Corynexochetids. And while, yes, the end Ordovician extinction event did negatively impact them and all other trilobite orders, they actually survived this and managed to take part in the third dynasty of trilobites. During the following Silurian and Devonian, they were kind of tied for third place, alongside the Lachaeta and potentially Coryxocheetah, depending on which region you were, second only to the Phacopoda and the Protida in terms of diversity. Sadly, this golden age was not to last. The end of Devonian saw a pair of events collectively we refer to as the end Devonian mass extinction event, or the late Devonian mass extinction event. These two events being the Kellwasser event, which occurred 372 million years ago, and the Hangienberg event, roughly 358 million years ago. The causes for these extinction events include the spread of land plants, which caused an increase in weathering, which released soils and nutrients into the water to such an extent that had not been seen before, leading to eutrophication, which is where algal blooms explode in population, sucking up all the oxygen, which leads to anoxia, aka a lack of oxygen, causing water life to literally suffocate because they have nothing to breathe. Other factors include global cooling, as the sudden spread of large land plants absorbed lots of the CO2, which is a gas that helps keep the earth warm, which caused a sudden decrease in temperature as well as a general decrease in sea levels due to more water being held in glaciers. As well as there's also some volcanism due to some volcanoes erupting in what is now Siberia and Russia. I hope that doesn't happen again. It would be a very bad thing for life. These pair of events absolutely served as a death knell for trilobites as a whole. While yes, the Lachaeta, Phacopoda, Harpeta, and Coryxocheetah maybe survived the first event, it's a bit complicated based on the fossil evidence. The Odontopleurida were swiftly wiped out at this very first blow, and so didn't live to see the second one wipe out all the remaining trilobites outside of Protida. Now, while it's hard to make judgments based on fossils, these guys definitely seem to be highly complex and specialized, as well as potentially delicate in terms of their environmental needs, all of which are bad traits to have during an extinction event. Not helping matters was their choice to live in shallow water reefs, which, were notably affected by this event, as the water was drained and rendered lacking in oxygen. And this also killed off all of the placoderms, all of the armored jawless fish, and a large chunk of eurypterids, acanthodians, and various other groups of invertebrates. So in this context, it's not surprising that the odontopleurids would have gone extinct. As such, the reasons for their extinction are quite self-evident. They became too specialized for the good times, and when the good times ended, these guys just died out. From the Odontopleurida, we learn that even the greatest armor cannot protect us if we lack the adaptability to change as the world's setting does. And we should try and implement that in our life. Be flexible, and don't try and replace flexibility with safety. Anyway, I'm the Dark Master, and if you liked this video, you liked it, but if you loved it, consider sharing it and subscribing. Join me next time on The Tale of the Trilobites, as we shall be covering the Trinoculata, the newest order of trilobites to be recognized. Have a wonderful day and take care.
Sorry, man, for feeling the way I do. Open wide and they'll shove in the meaning of life. Whoa.